Hey everyone, excited to be presenting today at the Tech Conference on rethinking the CDP and new ways that modern organizations are activating their data. With me here today, we have Natalie Miles, who's the head of marketing technology at Chime. I'm excited to introduce the guests and the agenda. So a bit about what we'll be speaking on today. First, we'll just go over some quick intros, very special guest here as well. And then we'll talk about kind of an overview of both companies, both Hightouch, where I'm one of the founders, and Chime, where Natalie runs marketing technology. And we'll speak a bit about the history of customer data platforms and sort of this whole problem of activating your data for personalization in marketing organizations. And then chat a bit about how that strategy is changing with new approaches coming into the market to activate data, and the pros and cons of those different approaches. And lastly, we'll round it out with a fireside chat with Natalie on her perspective across Chime, personalization, Martech, and some of her past experiences in the space. So to kick things off, let's do some quick introductions. Natalie, why don't you go first?
Hi, Tejas. Great to be here. I'm Natalie Miles. I'm the head of marketing technology here at Chime. Really excited to be here and talk about how the future of CDPs and data activation are driving our personalization strategy here at Chime.
Awesome. And I'm the person on the right smiling there. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO here at Hightouch. At Hightouch, we're kind of a leading player in the space of data activation. So helping companies use all their data to personalize marketing and growth activities across, all parts of the customer journeys, email, ads, and so forth. So excited to be with you today. But before we move too far in, I'd love to just set some background on both companies and give people a lay of the land. Natalie, do you want to tell us a bit about Chime and kind of where it fits into the financial services space?
Sure, yeah. For those less familiar, Chime is one of the oldest and largest neobanks in the United States. So we serve the 80% of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. And we do that by offering your core checking and banking services via our partner banks. Additionally, we offer a host of products and features that are designed to help our members get to their next paycheck, as well as help them improve and rebuild their credit score. Um, if you're familiar with the fintech space, you may also be aware of some of the macroeconomic trends that are shaping the industry. And Chime's certainly not immune to some of these challenges and obstacles that we're seeing. First, we're seeing banking as a service, which is making it easy for anyone to launch their own products. So what we continue to see is further commoditization within the neobank space, as well as commoditization of our value props. Additionally, right, super app is kind of a jargony term that every tech company seems to be aspiring towards. So this push towards offering more products and features, which means we also have to have the ability to make sure our experience isn't a one size fits all, because what you may have come to Chime previously for, right, may be evolving, and the use case you need to solve for may vary depending on person to person. And then anyone working in marketing right now is probably well aware of some of the pressure from a cost cutting mode. So we all need to be smarter about who we are acquiring and doing that more cheaply. So that's all to say this creates a need for personalization and to be able to do this in a scalable way.
Amazing. Thank you for that introduction, Natalie. A bit about Hightouch, and we'll get into this in later sections as well, so I'll keep this brief. But the overall problem we're trying to solve is data activation. What that really means is that a lot of organizations, I find these days, and this is actually a quote that one of our kind of large retail companies we were talking to mentioned to me personally, is that a lot of organizations are sort of data rich, access poor. So over the last 10 years, I think companies have really invested in collecting tons and tons of digital data, both just through natural evolutions of businesses like the rise of e-commerce, as well as just like, unified efforts to do things like capture analytics events from websites and bring data from different systems into data lakes and data warehouses, etc. But what we find is that a lot of that data and kind of all the advancements that happened in data infrastructure, machine learning has really only been applied so far to analytics, reporting, and more back office functions or large strategic decision making, powering reports for board meetings or campaign reporting or stuff like that. But what we find in the market is that there's so much opportunity in helping take all that data that companies have accumulated and put in the hands of marketers to actually activate it and drive personalization to send really personalized emails to customers or do better ad targeting, power conversion events, and power omni-channel workflows. And that's really what we're excited to help companies to do at Hightouch. And we provide a sort of new solution to this age-old problem that sits directly on top of all the data systems and data sources you have in your company and makes them activatable without having to use any engineering resources. So excited to talk a bit about this more today. Before we dive in, though, I'd love to step back and just talk about customer data platforms. So prior to founding Hightouch, I was actually an early engineer at a company called Segment in the customer data platform space. We were one of the earliest CDPs. It was sort of there actually before the term CDP was even a term, or now one of the hottest terms in MarTech, I'd say. But what is a CDP? Like a lot of people are using this term, and a lot of people just equate it to solving this problem of data activation. But what really is a CDP at its core? So when we're at Segment, kind of the way we wanted to design a CDP was to build a system where companies can collect all their data into this central hub from web data, mobile events, server-side events, events from checkout aisles into this sort of central hub of a CDP, do some modeling, ID resolution, data transformation, cleanup, stuff like that there, and then activate that data in end systems like your CRMs, like a Salesforce or Braze, Adobe, or ESPs or ad platforms. And it's really this kind of like full stack solution, getting data in from various sources, merging it together, sending it out to various places to provide the ability for companies to activate their data. Now, what I found in a lot of our implementations when actually implementing CDP in the enterprise for many, many years before founding Hightouch and coming up with this alternative is that a lot of CDP implementations looked a little bit less like this and a little bit more like this, where some data sources were flowing into the CDP cleanly, others were going to the data warehouse. Sometimes the data warehouse had to flow into the CDP. Sometimes there was data that wasn't even the picture that needed to be imported via CSVs. It was never ever like a really super perfect diagram of data coming into the central system and going out. And I think a lot of that issue was due to there being competing priorities for what is really the central source of truth in an organization. Companies were investing in the data warehouse as a source of truth, BI as a source of truth, the CDP as a source of truth. And there was never really one source of truth as portrayed in, this typical hub and spoke diagram that you'll see on most of the CDP websites. So a bit more on that, like what does that actually, it's great to see one diagram that's clean and one diagram that's a bit messier. What does that actually mean for the customer? What does that mean for marketing organizations? What does that actually mean for personalization? And what we found is that majority of the times, like companies would buy these CDPs as this you know giant solution that was going to solve all the problems when it came to customer data management and activation and personalization, but they often didn't really deliver. And the reason for it was exactly that. It's sort of hard to build a central source of truth in the CDP. They're often very rigid in terms of the data that they can accept. So, you can only have users structured this way and events on those users, but a lot of companies have a lot of other entities like pets, if you're a pet, or accounts, if you're in banking, or transactions, or tons of other sort of data models. In addition, there's kind of like multiple sources of truth. So companies would wonder, is the source of truth the data warehouse, kind of as you see here, that I'm relying on for BI and campaign reporting, or is it the CDP? And sometimes there can be discrepancies between the two. In addition, the approach that CDPs typically take when it comes to implementation, which is the most important part of any MarTech purchase, in my opinion, is hey, go ahead and track all your data in our way. Like we'll provide you, APIs and SDKs and a spec of how to track data in your organization and track it in all our way across all your properties. And then you'll have a perfect database of users that you can activate. But in reality, it's really hard to rally an organization to get all data tracked in this central way. And especially if you're a growing organization that's buying different companies, releasing new products, it's not a very flexible way to do data management. And people found, that there was a lot of data that didn't end up getting to the CDP due to this rigidity of how you had to send data to it. Versus something like a data warehouse where it's just really easy to dump tons and tons of information in there. Um, so going on, there's really a question of, what is the single source of truth? Natalie, I'm curious your thoughts here.
Yeah, so walking back a bit to our journey to buying a CDP. Earlier call back, we know personalization matters. It's an important strategy for us, given all the reasons we alluded to earlier. What we quickly ran into when we set forth on this, we need to deliver more one-to-one personalized experiences. The blocker quickly becomes data activation because without all of that rich customer and behavioral data, you can't power those one-to-one engaging user or member experiences. So that sort of set the stage for us realizing, hey, we need to go ahead and buy the CDP. What we quickly ran into as we went on the CDP journey and we were looking at a lot of traditional off the shelf CDPs were a lot of the limitations that Tejas alluded to earlier. Price was a big factor in that a lot of these pricing models rely on, event volume pricing. That's not very scalable, especially if you are doing personalization at scale. Implementation time, most traditional CDPs take up to 6 months before you start to see any sort of value from them. And that's due to a lot of the data and event instrumentation that you need to actually get the data into the CDP in order to activate it. And then data portability and security was a really big factor for us as well. Being in a heavily regulated space, having confidence to know that we own our member data and we aren't sending it into we aren't storing it on any company servers where we could potentially be exposing it. And ultimately, what we end up with is an incomplete view of our member because one, we're probably not porting over every possible data set into these CDPs because that is a Herculean task to manage. And then additionally, what you end up with is multiple systems of record. So marketing ends up using this CDP as their system of record or source of truth. And ultimately, the rest of the business is probably using their warehouse as their source of truth or system of record. And what we found was for more mature companies like Chime, your finance orgs and your analytics orgs are probably already using your warehouse as a source of truth. So what we didn't want to end up with is, right, a situation where you have multiple sources of truth because then there is no source of truth. And that's where we started to go down the reverse ETL path, which we were really excited about because this sort of became the bridge of the traditional CDP approach versus, warehouse first approach. And while we were pursuing sort of a warehouse first approach, the barrier quickly becomes the data activation piece. So your warehouse is that source of truth. How do you just get that data out of your warehouse into all of your different marketing tools and platforms where you're actually designing those member facing campaigns? And that's where we were really excited about the promise of reverse ETL because that is the bridge to making your CDP your actual customer data platform. You just need a data activation tool like Hightouch in order to get the data out of your warehouse where you have that complete view of your customer or member into all of your different tools and systems.
Yeah, exactly. And what we find is, there's all companies are at a different stage when it really comes to data maturity. I know Chime went through this yourself as well, but different companies have this much identity resolution done, or maybe they don't have that. They don't have all the data in their warehouse. They only have parts of it, et cetera. But kind of what we see across the board is that all kind of enterprise companies eventually converge on the data warehouse maybe not being the source of truth or the most perfect system in the world, but the best source of truth that you can get in an organization. So our perspective is if you're going to have to invest in one system, you kind of may as well invest in the system that's going to be used across the company. It's also going to be used for your reporting and analytics. It's also going to be used for BI, also for activation. And that's really what we aim to help with here at Hightouch. And a bit on our perspective of how we do this. So as you can see, like our platform kind of sits directly on top of the data warehouse and allows marketing teams through this interface studio actually build audience and segments and user traits to run personalization across all your different end tools like Salesforce, Iterable, HubSpot, Facebook, you name it. And one of the biggest fears we've seen across the board from customers when we bring up the data warehouse is the data warehouse is not very accessible typically. Typically, to use something like the data warehouse, you have to know how to write SQL, or there might even be an expectation to code or build pipelines to get data out of the warehouse into different places. And that's really what we want to eliminate by building Hightouch. I mean, we thought there was this view of the world in Martech that in order for things to be accessible, they had to be built on a new system, like a CDP or an ESP or a CRM. And what we wanted to really disrupt is, this idea that you need a new system or a new database to have a UI on top of it, where it's really accessible to marketers. So with Hightouch Customer Studio, like the beauty of it is that we actually put a marketer-friendly interface directly on top of the data systems like Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, Microsoft SQL, and different sort of database and data systems that already exist in the company, and just allow marketers to use that to build audiences, calculate traits like, let's say, lifetime value or last page viewed, and even do things like run experiments and splits. So say, hey, I want to take some of these users and run them through two different ad campaigns and see what the lift is, or see what the lift is on ads versus say email for the same type of retargeting motion for my customer base. So really, by having a central source of truth, it becomes a lot easier to run these sorts of experiments and activations and personalizations. Now, just to take a step back and sort of put it all into picture, here's what the overall architecture or architecture of using something like Hightouch looks like. So most likely in your organization, you already have a variety of data flowing into the data warehouse. And again, and most enterprise organizations or even mid-market organizations, it never looks as clean as the diagrams are. Now, there's not just going to be a few systems going in. There's going to be data coming from all sorts of different teams. But for the purpose of simplicity, you can see, events from things like Google Analytics, or state of the user from things like marketing automation systems, like did they open the last email, did they click some link inside of it, attribution data and reporting data coming in from ad platforms, databases that are powering your apps, all this data kind of flowing directly into the data warehouse, where data teams are actually able to help prepare that data for it to be used in things like BI. And the next step is, if you're already using data in the data warehouse and tools like Tableau or Looker, Power BI, data questions, run reporting, drive decisioning, really where Hightouch comes in, and this whole concept of reverse ETL or the composable CDP is taking that same source of truth and letting you use it for activation across all the systems in the business. And marketing really encompasses like 70-80% of the use cases here at Hightouch, but it's horizontal. Even companies that came with us initially for marketing use cases are like, we also want to get this data into our support system to influence the customer journey there, especially in certain industries where a lot of the customer journey has a human interaction in it. So this is sort of the diagram at a kind of 1,000-foot view of what the architecture looks like with the warehouse as a source of truth. And just to take a step back, again, always want to talk through diagrams are great. It's great to see that in practice, but what are the benefits for marketing teams? What are the benefits for organizations? And it's really boils down to a few things. One, and I think really the biggest one, is time to value. Like the most important thing I see whenever I see organizations make marketing technology decision is the difference between a good decision and a bad decision often comes down to, is there a good plan on how to actually extract value from this purchase and how to actually go about implementing it? Because when it comes to MarTech, I think most buyers at this point have realized the devil is in the details. There's a lot of claims from different vendors there that they'll solve all the problems, but the devil is in the details. Really, to understand if it's the right thing for your organization, you have to understand what's the path to value. And with the warehouse first approach, you can get it tremendously better time to value. Like it's kind of crazy, but some of our customers have even stood up, an audience builder on their warehouse the same day that they, connected Hightouch to their warehouse and got through sort of procurement and paperwork process and stuff like that. Now, will that be a complete record of the customer and we'll be able to solve all use cases without any data work? No, not necessarily. But you can start unlocking use cases and over time improving your record inside of the data warehouse to unlock more and more use cases and use more and more advanced functionality. Another really important value prop is data availability. I find that a lot of times marketing teams are sort of living in constraints of their end tools where they only have access to part of the data. They maybe only have access to events from a mobile app or website, but there's all this rich information that other parts of the business are creating in the product or in back-end transactions or in support systems or engagement systems around the company. And the beauty of relying on the data warehouse as kind of the source of truth is that it's kind of the most rich and thorough set of data across an organization these days. All teams really are contributing to this data source. It's easy to put data of all different formats in there. You can get data from all these different systems, and there's an ecosystem of tools that allow this. Whereas a lot of a CDP type system, you just have sort of clickstream data or basic data, similar to what you might find in something like Google Analytics inside of the CDP, just due to the way those systems are architected. And then lastly, kind of as Natalie already touched on within the context of Chime, there's a lot of benefits on the affordability perspective because you're not, double paying for the storage or compute to manage all this data since you're using a technology that you already have, as well as from a security perspective, a lot of financial services, healthcare, et cetera, companies prefer Hightouch because we don't really require storing all the data in our system. We can instead use a source of truth you already have, the data warehouse, and not store any data to do our processing, which is a really big benefit of kind of the composable approach. But enough talking on my end. Would love to hear more from Natalie for the remainder of the session on kind of her perspective on personalization, Chime's use cases, and where this composable CDP stuff's heading. So to kick it off, Natalie, I'd love to hear like what do you see as like the biggest use cases for personalization at Chime at more of a business level or a customer level?
Yeah, I mean, going back to one of the big value props of a product like Hightouch is that very quick time to value, and where we're really honing in on our initial foundational use cases for Hightouch is especially on the paid advertising realm. So going back to right, one of the core things we want to solve for is ad spend efficiency. Going back to we're in cost cutting mode, right? We need to be smarter about who we're acquiring and acquiring them more cheaply. A big part of that requires first party data passed back to these to these ad platforms to do things like better bid optimization. So we're really focused on those paid advertising use cases. Additionally, we expect to see a lot of value very quickly from those use cases. There are a whole host of use cases, even just within marketing, lifecycle marketing for sure, and the ability to deliver more one-to-one engaging emails and push notifications to drive retention. Those tend to be sort of a slower burn. But yeah, we're really excited. And then beyond just marketing as well, I don't see this strictly as a marketing tool. I don't think marketing is the end all be all when it comes to creating a powerful, meaningful member experience. Things like your support teams, right? The more you can empower them with data to deliver a better support experience. There are a whole host of use cases for us to delve into.
No, 100% makes sense. And one thing that's always super interesting to me when I hear about personalization projects and CDP projects is just how cross-functional they are in practice. What does that layout look like at Chime? Like who drives these efforts? How does that situation look?
Yeah, I mean, even within marketing, I would say marketing is very cross-functional. Marketing's not a monolith, and it requires
For sure.
understanding all the differences of all these channels. So The paid use cases are going to be very different from lifecycle versus our organic team. And then additionally, there is a huge cross-functional effort with our data engineering team. And that is one of the challenges we were running into with looking into onboarding a traditional CDP. The amount of effort and resourcing that would have been required from our data eng team to stand this up would have been enormous. And if you're operating in a world where your data team is a shared service and you don't have embedded resources to serve marketing, as much as possible, you want to keep the resourcing requirements on these teams to a minimum. Otherwise, you'll never get traction or prioritization with these teams.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And at past organizations, had you ever seen companies roll out like in-house approaches to say something like composable CDP or reverse ETL? And what do you see as like the challenges of that, or some of the benefits of taking that approach as well?
Yeah, so I would say historically, right, there's always been sort of this traditional off the shelf CDP approach, which many in MarTech are familiar with. I was also fortunate enough to work at Credit Karma, another fintech company prior, where we had more of a warehouse first approach. Going back to, historically, the challenge with a warehouse first approach is that actual data activation piece and getting the data out of the warehouse. And historically, with a warehouse first approach, right, it required a bunch of homebrew solutions. So we had to build our own ESP that sat on top of our warehouse at the time in order to actually activate the data. And there was an enormous amount of technical dependencies on these data eng teams to actually make that happen. So we still never really got to that full vision of allowing marketers to self-serve their own data activation needs.
Makes total sense. And lastly, to round it out here, any hot takes for the MarTech space? Doesn't have to be about CDP, doesn't have to be about activation, whatever you want. I know you're in on across the whole space.
Yeah, there's so many. I think there are so many myths in MarTech and marketing in general. And partly, I think there's been a lot of obfuscation across MarTech vendors. They all want to create these very generic terms that don't mean anything. I think multi-touch attribution is one of those. Like, it's always an idea, but perfection never really exists. You can get close to it, but is anyone truly doing multi-touch attribution, especially in a world of, I know, IDFA deprecation and cookie
Third party
deprecation?
cookies, yeah.
It's becoming harder and harder to track users in an anonymous state. And if you can't do that, do you truly have multi-touch attribution? So that's a big one. And then identity resolution is kind of a supporting factor of that. You need, comprehensive identity resolution in order to do multi-touch attribution. Lots of promises and a lot of, I would say, under delivering in the space right now.
No, 100%. I think myth busting Martech would be an interesting series of sorts. I feel like there's so many promises and broad statements. You're like really vendors are trying to differentiate with very broad strokes on what can be solved. Whereas I think the future talent in the Martech profession is really going to be being able to understand the details, being able to understand how this fits into the wider IT or information or data architecture of the company, and just like being really lean and nimble and being able to just go quick on time to value. That's kind of my perspective on where the best sort of martech professionals will stand out. um, Anyways, I think we're low on time now, so wrapping it up, just wanted to say that really excited to have the opportunity to present here at the martech conference about composable cdps, and very excited about honestly the future of the space of the data warehouse in martech. If anyone wants to chat about this stuff at any time, feel free to reach out to Natalie or I. We love nerding out about it, and there's a lot of trends that are interesting here that I think just make the data warehouse and data cloud more powerful. From first party data to second party data and data clean rooms, how does third party data and data sharing start getting involved here, and even things like data warehouse expanding to real time. So again, thanks for having us, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you for watching. Click the agenda link at the top of your screen to choose your next session.